May it please your lordship, I am Yate-Mcleod, and I continue the case for the respondent in this action. My lord, the respondent submits that Justice Lawrence Boyce was correct to hold that Pan Properties Limited's construction does not qualify as basic preservation works under the Access to Neighbouring Land Act 1992, and that they should thus be refused entry to Ms. Darling's property. My lord, I make this submission on the grounds that the nature of the work carried out by PP Limited cannot be considered basic preservation works as defined by the Access to Neighbouring Land Act. The respondent further submits that the purpose of Pan Properties Limited's proposed entry is not legally justifiable. On the first submission, Section 1, Subsection 4 of the Access to Neighbouring Land Act clearly defines what may be considered to be basic preservation works. It specifies that work may be considered to be for the basic preservation of the dominant land if it involves the maintenance, repair, or renewal of any part of a building or structure situated on the land, or the clearance, repair, or renewal of any drain, sewer, pipe, or cable situated on the land, or the treatment, cutting back, felling, removal, or replacement of any hedge, tree, shrub, or any other growing thing situated on the dominant land. My lord, not only does PP Limited's work not fit in with any of these, but it is entirely different in nature. This list concerns the maintenance and preservation of work which has already been completed, not the erection of an entirely new building. And the respondent thus submits that PP Limited's work cannot be considered basic preservation work by this definition. Furthermore, Section 1, Subsection 5 of the Access to Neighbouring Land Act does make allowance for other unforeseen circumstances in which work may be considered necessary for the preservation of the dominant land. However, the clause is worded in such a way which suggests that construction work is not in itself an acceptable justification for entry to a neighbour's land. It states that if the court considers it fair and reasonable in all circumstances of the case, works may be regarded for the purposes of this Act as being reasonably necessary for the preservation of any land, notwithstanding that the works incidentally involve the making of some alteration, adjustment, or improvement to the land. My lord, it has previously been submitted that the erection of a new building is not maintenance work, and I now submit that it would more appropriately be considered to be some alteration, adjustment, or improvement to the land. By stating that preservation work of the dominant land may be considered reasonable grounds for accessing a neighbour's property, notwithstanding that it may incidentally involve adjustment, alteration, or improvement, suggests that adjustment, alteration, or improvement cannot in itself be considered reasonable grounds for entry into a neighbour's land. Thus, the allowance made by the Access to Neighbouring Land Act for unforeseen circumstances, which may still be considered basic preservation work, does not apply to the work being proposed by Pan Properties Limited. My lord, the respondent further submits that this construction project, being for private benefit, does not possess the motivation traditionally supported by English law. I cite here Clark and Linsell on torts, which is to be found in page 7 of the bundle provided to your lordship. Clark and Linsell use trespass as an example and state, trespass can be justified to show that it was necessary to enter upon the land to preserve life or property. The defence of necessity is not favoured by the courts, especially when the defendant acted to protect a private rather than a public interest. By way of example, I cite the case of Dewey and White and others, as reported in the 173rd volume of the English Reports for 1827, at page 1079, also found on page 7 of the bundle. I will now provide a brief summary of the case for your lordship's benefit. A stack of chimneys was thrown onto the roof of the plaintiff, amongst other roofs. The plaintiff argued that this amounted to entry into his property and a nuisance. The defendants, who were firemen from the British Fire Office, argued that their actions were necessary to protect the public as the chimneys were from the roofs of buildings which had been damaged by fire, and were in their current state in danger of falling from their roofs and onto an adjoining thoroughfare. Thus they claimed that the immediate removal of the chimneys to a safe location was necessary for the preservation of public safety. Chief Justice Best ruled that the firemen had acted legally, and it was of the utmost importance that the chimneys did not harm members of the public, and that thus the entry into the plaintiff's property was justifiable. The entry into a neighbour's property which is proposed by Pan Properties Limited is entirely different to this case. Its motivation is for private benefit, not an assurance of public well-being. It is thus submitted that PP Limited's motivation for entering into Miss Darling's property ought not be supported by this court. In summary, my lord, the respondent submits that Pan Properties Limited's construction project is entirely different in character from those which are both explicitly and implicitly allowed by the Access to Neighbouring Land Act. It is further submitted that the nature of Pan Property Limited's motivation behind the construction work, which is for private rather than public benefit, does not merit the support of this court in entering Miss Darling's property. Unless I can provide further assistance to your lordship, those conclude the arguments for the respondent.